I never thought I'd become invisible in my own home. But that's what happens when you love someone more than you love yourself. You fade, piece by piece, until all that's left is the sound of your footsteps in empty rooms and the echo of words you wish you'd never heard. My name is Teresa. I'm 63 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that love was enough. That if you gave everything, your time, your strength, your very soul, the people you loved would see you, really see you. But I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday night. I remember because Tuesdays were always when I made David's favorite meal, roasted chicken with garlic potatoes, the recipe my mother taught me when I was just a girl learning to cook in her tiny kitchen. I still remember the way she'd hold my hands over the cutting board, guiding my fingers as I chopped onions, her voice soft and patient. "Love is in the details, Teresa," she'd say. "When you cook for someone, you're feeding more than their body. You're feeding their heart." I carried that lesson with me for 40 years. Through marriage, through widowhood, through the long nights when my husband's absence felt like a physical wound that wouldn't heal. Through the mornings I woke at 4 to work the early shift at the textile factory, my fingers raw from the machines, my back aching from standing all day. Through the afternoons I spent cleaning other people's houses, because one job was never enough to give my son what he deserved: a good education, clean clothes, a chance at something better than the life I'd known. David was everything to me. When his father died of a heart attack at 42, leaving me with a pile of medical bills and a 7-year-old boy who still called for his papa in his sleep, I made a promise. I would be both mother and father. I would work twice as hard, love twice as deeply, sacrifice everything if it meant David would never feel the absence his father left behind. I kept that promise. God knows I kept it. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his college textbooks. I wore the same 3 dresses for 5 years so he could have new shoes for school. I ate rice and beans for dinner while he had meat and vegetables because growing boys need nutrition, need strength. I told him I wasn't hungry, that I'd eaten at work, and I smiled when he believed me because his comfort mattered more than my empty stomach. When he graduated with honors, I cried tears of pure joy. My son, my beautiful, brilliant son, had made it. He had a degree, a future, opportunities I could never have dreamed of when I was his age. He got a job at a good company, started earning a salary that seemed impossible to someone like me who'd spent her whole life counting pennies and praying they'd stretch until the next payday. And then he met Vanessa. She was pretty, polished, the kind of woman who wore expensive perfume and had manicured nails that had never scrubbed a floor or washed dishes until her hands cracked and bled. She worked in the same office as David, came from a family with money, not wealthy, but comfortable in a way that people like me could never quite understand. They didn't know what it meant to choose between medicine and food, between heating and electricity. When David told me they were getting married, I was happy for him, truly happy. Every mother wants to see her son find love, build a life, create a family of his own. I welcomed Vanessa into our home, into the small house I'd finally managed to buy after 25 years of renting rooms and apartments that smelled of other people's lives. When they mentioned they were looking for a place to live, something affordable while they saved for their own home, I didn't hesitate. "Stay here," I said. Stay with me until you can afford something better. The house is small, but there's room. We'll make it work. I meant it. I cleaned out the larger bedroom, the one I'd been using since my husband died, and moved my things into the smaller room at the back of the house. I bought new curtains for their windows, fresh sheets for their bed. I wanted them to feel comfortable, to have privacy, to start their married life in a space that felt like theirs, even if it was under my roof. "You don't have to do this, Mama," David said, but his eyes were already looking at the bigger room, already imagining his life there with his new wife. "I want to," I told him, and I did. What mother wouldn't want to help her child? The first few months were pleasant enough. I tried to give them space, tried not to intrude on their privacy. I cooked meals and left them warming on the stove so they could eat whenever they wanted. I did their laundry along with mine because it seemed easier than having them take over the small washing machine I'd bought used from a neighbor. I kept the house clean, tended the small garden in the backyard where I grew tomatoes and herbs to save money on groceries. Vanessa didn't say much to me. She was polite, always polite. But there was a distance in her eyes when she looked at me, as if she was seeing something she couldn't quite understand or didn't want to. She'd smile tightly when I offered her food, decline most of the time saying she'd already eaten or wasn't hungry. She spent most of her time in their bedroom with David, and I told myself that was natural, that newlyweds needed their privacy, their own world apart from everyone else. But slowly I began to notice things, small things at first. The way David's voice changed when he talked to me versus when he talked to Vanessa, warmer with her, efficient with me, as if I was a task to be completed rather than his mother who'd given him everything. The way he'd cut conversations short when she entered the room, as if my presence was somehow embarrassing or inappropriate when she was around. The way they'd lower their voices when I walked past their door, conversations suddenly becoming whispers. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was being sensitive, maybe even a little jealous of having to share my son with another woman. It's natural, I thought. He has a wife now. His priorities have shifted. This is what's supposed to happen. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and speak to real experiences, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to us. And leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I'd love to know there are others out there who understand what it means to love deeply, even when that love goes unnoticed. That Tuesday night, I'd spent the afternoon preparing David's favorite meal. My knees ached from standing. Arthritis had been getting worse lately, making simple tasks feel like small battles. But I didn't mind. Cooking for my son had always been an act of love, a way to show him without words that he mattered, that he was valued, that someone in this world would always care about his comfort and happiness. I'd just finished setting the table when I realized I'd forgotten to tell them dinner was ready. Their bedroom door was closed, as it usually was in the evenings. I could hear their voices inside, David's deeper tone mixing with Vanessa's higher pitch. They were talking, maybe laughing about something. I walked down the hallway, my old slippers making soft, shuffling sounds against the worn wooden floor. I raised my hand to knock, to call out that food was ready, when I heard my name. Teresa. I froze. Something in the way Vanessa said it made my hand stop midair. That fat woman disgusts me. The words hit me like physical blows, sharp, precise, cruel in a way that took my breath away. But it was the voice that followed, the voice I knew better than my own, the voice I'd comforted through nightmares and celebrated through victories, that truly shattered me. I can't stand the way she hovers. David, my son, the child I'd carried in my body, nursed at my breast, held through fevers and fears. The boy I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, sacrificed everything for, loved with every atom of my being. His voice, cold and disgusted, talking about me as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden, something revolting that needed to be tolerated rather than loved. I don't remember walking back to my room. I don't remember sitting down on my bed. I only remember the way my hands trembled as I pressed them against my chest, trying to hold in the pain that was threatening to tear me apart from the inside out. Fat. Disgusting. Hovering. Was that how he saw me? After everything? After all those years of working until my body screamed for rest? After all those sacrifices that had carved pieces out of my soul? After all that love I'd poured into him like water into soil, hoping something beautiful would grow? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those words again, playing on an endless loop in my mind like a broken record that wouldn't stop spinning. Fat. Disgusting. Hovering. Each word was a knife, and by morning, I felt like I'd been cut 1,000 times in places no one could see. When dawn came, I got up and did what I'd always done. I made breakfast. My hands moved through the familiar motions mechanically, cracking eggs into the pan, toasting bread, brewing coffee strong enough to mask the bitterness I felt rising in my throat. The kitchen had always been my sanctuary, the place where I could show love through actions when words felt inadequate. But that morning, it felt different. Hollow. Like I was performing a ritual that had lost all meaning. David came out first, his hair still wet from the shower, wearing one of the expensive shirts I'd ironed the night before. He kissed my cheek the way he always did, quick, perfunctory, already thinking about his day ahead. "Morning, Mama," he said, sitting down at the table as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis just hours before. I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find the boy I'd raised. The one who used to wrap his small arms around my neck and tell me I was the best mama in the whole world. The one who cried when he saw me working late into the night, who promised that when he grew up, he'd take care of me the way I'd taken care of him. But all I saw was a stranger, a man who'd learned to hide his true feelings behind polite gestures and empty words. "Good morning," I said, and my voice sounded normal, warm even. I'd learned long ago how to smile when I was breaking inside. Working-class women master that skill early, or we don't survive. Vanessa emerged a few minutes later, dressed impeccably as always, her makeup already perfect even at 7 in the morning. She glanced at the breakfast spread, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit I'd cut into small pieces because that's how she preferred it, and wrinkled her nose slightly. "Just coffee for me," she said, pouring herself a cup. "I'm watching my figure." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Unlike some people, her tone suggested. Unlike women who let themselves go, who don't have the discipline or self-respect to maintain an attractive appearance. David said nothing. He just continued eating his eggs, scrolling through his phone as if his wife hadn't just delivered another small cruelty to his mother. I sat down across from them with my own cup of coffee, black, no sugar, because I'd trained myself years ago to skip unnecessary calories, and watched them. Really watched them. David focused on his screen, completely absorbed in whatever work emails or news articles demanded his attention. Vanessa sipped her coffee delicately, her eyes distant, already somewhere else in her mind. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them asked how I'd slept, or if I had plans for the day, or any of the small questions that people ask when they care about someone's existence. I was invisible, sitting right there at my own kitchen table, in the house I'd worked for decades to buy, and I was completely invisible to them. Something shifted inside me that morning. Not all at once. It was too gradual for that, too subtle. But I felt it. A hardening, maybe, or perhaps a quieting. The part of me that had always reached out, always tried to connect, always hoped that my love would be returned in even the smallest measure. That part went silent. I didn't stop cooking. I didn't stop cleaning. I didn't stop doing all the things a mother does, but I stopped expecting anything in return. I stopped hoping that maybe today David would notice the effort I put into making his life comfortable. I stopped imagining that Vanessa might one day see me as something other than an unfortunate obstacle between her and the life she wanted. I simply retreated. Into myself. Into the small corners of the house where they didn't need me or want me. The days began to blur together after that. I'd wake early, prepare breakfast, and leave it on the stove for them to serve themselves. I stopped joining them at the table. I ate earlier, I'd say if they asked, which they rarely did. I'd spend my mornings in the garden, tending to the tomato plants and herbs that had become my only reliable source of companionship. Plants don't judge you for being fat or old or in the way. They just grow if you water them and pull the weeds that threaten to choke them out. I started taking longer walks in the afternoons, wandering through the neighborhood I'd lived in for 15 years but had never really explored. I discovered a small park 3 blocks away where elderly people gathered on benches to feed pigeons and talk about their ailments and their grandchildren. I didn't join them. I wasn't ready for that kind of vulnerability, that admission that I was lonely and desperate for human connection. But I'd sit on a bench at the far end and watch them, wondering if they had children who called them, who visited, who remembered their birthdays without being reminded. In the evenings, I'd retreat to my small bedroom at the back of the house and read the novels I'd been collecting from the thrift store, paperback romances and mysteries that cost 50 cents each. I'd lose myself in other people's stories, other people's problems and triumphs, because it was easier than facing my own. David and Vanessa barely seemed to notice my withdrawal. If anything, they seemed more relaxed, more comfortable now that I wasn't hovering. I'd hear them laughing in their room, talking late into the night about their plans, their dreams, their future. A future that apparently didn't include much space for the woman who'd made their present possible. About 3 weeks after that terrible night, I overheard another conversation. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I'd simply come inside from watering the garden and they were in the living room, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the old house. "How much longer do we have to stay here?" Vanessa's voice was tight with frustration. "I can't stand living in this cramped little house with your mother breathing down our necks." "She's not that bad," David said, but his tone was defensive rather than supportive. He was protecting himself, not me. She's always here, David. Always. And the way she looks at me sometimes. Like I'm not good enough for you or something. I pressed my hand against the doorframe to steady myself. I'd never once looked at Vanessa with judgment. If anything, I'd looked at her with curiosity, trying to understand the woman my son had chosen, hoping to find common ground where we might build some kind of relationship. "Look, we're saving money," David said. "That was the whole point of staying here, to build up our savings so we can afford a down payment on our own place. We're almost there." "Your mother could help us," Vanessa said, and something in her voice made my blood run cold. "She owns this house. She must have some equity built up. Couldn't she take out a loan or something? Help us get started?" There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting to hear David defend me, to tell his wife that I'd already given everything I had, that asking for more would be unconscionable. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "That's all. I'll think about it. Not, my mother has sacrificed enough. Not, we need to do this on our own. Just, I'll think about it." I walked back outside before they could hear me, before the tears that were building behind my eyes could fall and betray the pain that was becoming my constant companion. I stood in my garden, surrounded by the plants I'd nurtured from seeds, and I understood with terrible clarity that I'd become nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Not a mother. Not a person with feelings and needs and dreams that had been deferred for decades. Just something useful until I wasn't anymore. The requests started small after that. David mentioned casually that they needed money for a car repair. His luxury sedan had a problem with the transmission. Could I help out? Just this once? It was only $800. I gave it to him. I had a small emergency fund I'd been building, penny by penny for years. Money I'd saved in case I got sick or lost my job or needed something urgent. But he was my son, and sons needed help sometimes. 2 weeks later, Vanessa mentioned that she needed a new laptop for work. Hers was outdated, she said, and it was affecting her productivity. Could I possibly contribute? Just $200 toward it? I gave her the money. I told myself it was an investment in their future, in their success. Then David needed new suits for work. Then Vanessa wanted to take a training course that cost $300. Then there were tickets to a concert they'd been wanting to attend, and dinner at expensive restaurants to celebrate promotions and anniversaries, and occasions I wasn't invited to share. Each time, I gave them what they asked for. And each time, there was no gratitude, just an expectation that of course I would help, because what else was I good for? My emergency fund dwindled, then disappeared entirely. I started working extra hours at the fabric store where I'd found part-time work after retiring from the factory. My arthritis made standing for long periods painful, but pain was something I'd learned to live with. It was easier than the alternative, saying no to my son and having to face the reality that our relationship had become nothing more than a financial transaction. I stopped buying myself new clothes. The ones I had were old and worn, but they still covered me. Still kept me warm. That was enough. I started buying cheaper food, more rice and beans, less meat and fresh vegetables. My body didn't need much anyway, I told myself. I was old, sedentary. I didn't need the nutrition that younger people required. I canceled my small life insurance policy, The one I'd maintained for years so that David wouldn't have to worry about burial expenses when I died. The monthly premium could be better used for the household, I reasoned. David would figure something out when the time came. I existed on less and less space, less food, less money, less acknowledgement, while they expanded into the void I'd created, filling it with their wants and needs and demands that seemed to grow more insistent with each passing month. And through it all, I said nothing. I smiled when they asked for things. I provided what I could. I pretended that everything was fine, that I was happy to help, that being useful made me feel valued rather than depleted. But late at night, alone in my small bedroom, I'd look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. When had I become so small? When had I learned to fold myself into such a tiny space that I barely existed at all? The woman in the mirror had aged. Her hair was completely gray now, her face lined with wrinkles that mapped out decades of worry and work. Her body was soft and heavy, the body of someone who'd spent years prioritizing everyone else's hunger over her own, eating whatever was left over, finding comfort in food when comfort couldn't be found anywhere else. Fat, disgusting, hovering. Was this what my son saw when he looked at me? Was this creature in the mirror so repulsive that the child I'd given life to couldn't stand the sight of me? I turned away from the mirror and climbed into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. Tomorrow I'd get up and do it all again. Make breakfast, maintain the house, work my shifts at the store, give them whatever they asked for. Because that's what mothers do. We give, we sacrifice. We love even when that love is returned with indifference or contempt. We endure. Because what other choice do we have? The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late September. Thick, cream-colored paper, embossed lettering, the kind of elegant stationery that announced its expense before you even read the words printed on it. It was addressed to David and Vanessa Morrison, and when I saw it lying on the hall table where the mail carrier had left it, something twisted in my chest. Vanessa's sister was getting married. The invitation included a +1, and there would be a family dinner the night before the ceremony. An intimate gathering for close relatives only, the card specified in delicate script. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Vanessa opened it that evening, her face lighting up with the kind of genuine excitement I rarely saw from her. "Oh, David, look! Melissa's finally doing it." And they're having the reception at the Grand Hotel. That's the most expensive venue in the city. David leaned over her shoulder, reading the details. "Sounds nice. When is it?" 3 weeks from Saturday, and there's a family dinner the night before at her future in-laws' house. Vanessa's eyes were already distant, probably planning what dress she'd wear, how she'd style her hair. "We'll need to get them a really good gift, something impressive." "Of course," David agreed. "This is a big deal for your family." They discussed the wedding for the next hour, what they'd wear, whether they should book a hotel room so they wouldn't have to drive back late, how much they should spend on a gift that would reflect well on them. I listened from my room, where I'd retreated with a book I wasn't actually reading, and I waited. I waited for David to mention me. To say something like, "Should we check if Mama wants to come?" Or, "We should get a gift from all of us, including Mama." But he never did. And Vanessa certainly never suggested it. The day before the family dinner, I finally gathered the courage to ask. David was in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich before they left for the weekend. They'd decided to stay in a hotel near the venue, make a little vacation out of it, Vanessa had said. "David," I began, my voice sounding too small even to my own ears. "About tomorrow night. The dinner with Vanessa's family." He looked up, his expression politely attentive but already impatient, as if I was about to ask something unreasonable. "I was wondering, I know it's family, and I thought maybe—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The words stuck in my throat like dry bread. "It's really just for immediate family, Mama," he said quickly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Vanessa's parents, her siblings, the groom's parents. It's going to be pretty small." "I understand," I said, even though I didn't. Even though Vanessa's elderly aunt was going, and her cousin from out of state, and several other relatives who weren't immediate family, but were apparently close enough to warrant inclusion. "And the wedding itself is going to be pretty formal," he continued, warming to his explanation now that he'd started. "Black tie, sit-down dinner, assigned seating. Vanessa's parents are paying for it, so we don't really have any say in the guest list." I nodded. "Of course. I just thought, maybe I could at least meet them, her family, since we're all living together and—" "It's just complicated, Mama." His voice had an edge to it now, the tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation he found uncomfortable. "Maybe another time, a more casual thing." But we both knew there would never be another time. There would never be a casual gathering where I was deemed appropriate enough, presentable enough, worthy enough to be introduced to his wife's family. I was the secret they kept, the embarrassing relative hidden away, the woman who was useful for free rent and occasional loans, but not suitable for public display. They left that Friday afternoon, their car packed with expensive luggage and garment bags protecting the formal wear they'd bought specifically for this occasion. David kissed my cheek as he always did, that same quick, meaningless gesture, and told me they'd be back Sunday evening. "Have a good time," I said, and I meant it, or at least I wanted to mean it. What kind of mother doesn't want her son to enjoy himself? The house felt different when they were gone. Not peaceful exactly, but less suffocating. I didn't have to measure my movements or monitor my presence. I could exist without worrying that I was hovering, that I was taking up too much space, that the sound of my footsteps was an intrusion on their comfort. I spent that evening in the living room, their living room, really, since I'd stopped feeling like any part of this house belonged to me, and I looked at the photographs on the mantel. Most of them were recent, pictures of David and Vanessa at various events and locations, smiling on a beach somewhere tropical, dressed up for a company party, posed in front of a restaurant I'd never been to. There were a few older photos mixed in. David's college graduation, where I stood next to him in my best dress. The navy blue one I'd worn to every important event for 5 years because I couldn't afford anything else. David as a teenager, gangly and bright-eyed, standing in front of our old apartment building. One picture of me and my husband on our wedding day, both of us so young and full of hope that it hurt to look at. But notably absent were any recent photos of me. No pictures from holidays or birthdays. No casual snapshots of everyday life. It was as if I'd ceased to exist somewhere around the time David got married. as if my relevance had ended the moment his life moved forward without needing me to push it along anymore. I picked up the wedding photo of me and Roberto. We'd gotten married at the courthouse because we couldn't afford a real ceremony. I wore a simple white dress my mother had sewn for me, and Roberto wore his only suit, the one he'd later be buried in. We were happy that day. Poor, but happy. Full of plans and dreams about the life we'd build together. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this?" I whispered to his image, to the young man frozen in time who would never grow old or disappointed. That the son we loved so much would... I couldn't finish the thought. Saying it out loud made it too real, too permanent. That weekend, alone in the house, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went into their bedroom. Not to snoop. I wasn't looking for evidence of anything in particular. I just wanted to see the space they'd created, the life they were living in the room that used to be mine. It was immaculate. Vanessa kept everything organized with the precision of someone who'd never had to make do with cramped quarters or limited storage. The closet was full of her clothes, beautiful things, expensive things, more outfits than any one person could possibly need. David's side was equally well stocked with tailored suits and designer shirts. On the dresser sat photographs in expensive frames. Vanessa with her family, all of them polished and smiling. David and Vanessa at various locations I didn't recognize. Vanessa's friends at what looked like a bridal shower. Her sister, the one getting married this weekend, in a candid shot that captured her mid-laugh. Not a single photo included me. I sat on the edge of their bed. The bed that had been mine, in the room that had been mine, in the house I'd worked 25 years to buy. And I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. On the nightstand, I noticed a notebook. Vanessa's handwriting covered the open page. A to-do list, it looked like. I know I shouldn't have read it. Privacy matters, even when you feel invisible. But my eyes caught on a few lines before I could stop myself. Talk to David about moving timeline. Can't stay here much longer. Look into mother-in-law suites for future house. Separate entrance. Must have. Discuss financial contribution from T. She owes us after free rent. T. She couldn't even write my full name. I'd been reduced to an initial, and apparently I owed them. For living in my own house. For existing in their presence. The mother-in-law suite notation made me laugh, though it came out more like a sob. They were already planning how to warehouse me in whatever future they built, how to keep me contained and separate, accessible when needed, but otherwise out of sight. I left their room and returned to my own small space at the back of the house. The room that had once been storage, that I'd converted into a bedroom when I'd given them the master suite. It was barely large enough for my single bed and a small dresser. The window looked out onto the neighbor's fence. No view, no natural light worth mentioning. This was what I'd been reduced to. This tiny room, this minimal existence, this life of careful invisibility. Sunday evening, they returned full of stories about the wedding, how beautiful it had been, how elegant the venue, how touching the ceremony. Vanessa showed me photos on her phone, scrolling quickly through images of people I didn't know celebrating a moment I hadn't been invited to share. "Melissa looked gorgeous," she said, her voice still bright with the excitement of the weekend. "And the food was incredible. They had this 5-course meal with wine pairings for each course. I've never seen anything so fancy." "It sounds wonderful," I said, and I tried to be happy for her. I really did. David was quieter than usual, and I noticed him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe? Or was that just wishful thinking on my part? Did he feel even the slightest bit of remorse for excluding me? For erasing me from his life except when he needed something from me? "Vanessa's mother asked about you," he said suddenly, and both Vanessa and I looked at him in surprise. "She did?" I asked, pathetically eager for even this small acknowledgement of my existence. "Yeah. She wondered why you weren't there. I told her you weren't feeling well." Of course. He'd lied. Told them I was sick rather than admitting he hadn't invited his own mother to a family event. Because the truth would have made him look bad, would have raised questions he didn't want to answer. "I hope that was okay," he added, and there was something defensive in his tone. I didn't know what else to say. "It's fine," I told him, because what else could I say? That I wished he'd told them the truth? That I wished he'd fought for my inclusion? That I wished he'd remembered, even for a moment, that I was his mother and not just an inconvenience to be managed? That night, I made them a special dinner. I don't know why. Maybe because I was trying to remind them that I had value, that I could contribute something they couldn't easily replace. Or maybe I just needed to do something with my hands, something familiar and practiced that didn't require me to think about how small my world had become. I made Roberto's favorite dish, the one I used to make for special occasions, the recipe that took hours of preparation and required ingredients I could barely afford on my fixed income now. But I made it anyway, and I set the table with the good dishes I'd inherited from my mother, and I called them to dinner like I used to do when David was young and mealtimes were still sacred, still moments of connection rather than obligation. They ate quickly, barely tasting the food I'd spent all afternoon preparing. David scrolled through his phone between bites. Vanessa picked at her meal, eating maybe a third of it before pushing her plate away. "I'm so full from this weekend," she said by way of explanation. "We ate so much rich food." I looked at the meal I'd prepared, the meat I'd marinated overnight, the vegetables I'd chopped and sautéed with care, the rice I'd cooked to perfect fluffy tenderness. Hours of work, and they'd barely noticed. After dinner, they retreated to their room. I heard their voices through the door as I cleaned up the kitchen, washing dishes by hand because the sound of the dishwasher might disturb them. "Your mother went all out tonight," Vanessa said, her tone suggesting this was somehow suspicious rather than kind. "Yeah, I noticed," David replied. "I think she was upset about not going to the wedding." "Well, what did she expect? It wasn't appropriate. She doesn't even know my family." "I know. You're right." No defense. No, maybe we should have included her. Just agreement that I was inappropriate, that my expectations of basic inclusion in my own son's life were somehow unreasonable. I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water, staring out at the darkening backyard, and I realized something that should have been obvious long before. I wasn't going to wake up one day and find that things had changed. David wasn't going to suddenly remember the sacrifices I'd made and feel grateful. Vanessa wasn't going to see me as anything other than an obstacle between her and the life she wanted. This was it. This was my life now, and it would continue this way until I died, or they finally succeeded in moving me out completely. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something else. Something quieter and colder. Something that felt almost like clarity. I finished the dishes and dried them carefully, putting each one back in its proper place. Then I walked to my small room at the back of the house, closed the door, and sat on my bed in the darkness. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. I just sat there, thinking, planning, remembering things I'd tried to forget, things about Roberto, about the life we'd built, about the secrets we'd kept because some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Something was shifting inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something older and deeper than that. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. And it was finally beginning to wake up. The letter arrived 3 days before my 64th birthday. Not that anyone remembered my birthday was coming. David had forgotten it for the past 2 years, and I'd stopped reminding him because watching him scramble to buy a last-minute card filled with generic sentiments hurt more than being forgotten entirely. The envelope was official-looking, return address from a law office downtown. Morrison and Chen, attorneys at law. My hands trembled as I opened it, already knowing that nothing good ever came in envelopes like this. Dear Mrs. Teresa Morrison, it began, in that cold, impersonal language that lawyers use to deliver life-altering news as if they were discussing the weather. This letter is to inform you that our clients, David Morrison and Vanessa Morrison, are formally requesting that you vacate the premises located at 428 Maple Street within 60 days of receipt of this notice. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. Vacate the premises. My house. The house I'd bought with money I'd earned standing on factory floors until my feet bled and my back screamed for mercy. The house whose mortgage I'd paid faithfully for 15 years until it was finally, fully mine. The letter continued with legal justifications I didn't fully understand. Something about adverse possession and primary residence establishment and good faith occupancy. Big words that apparently meant that because David's name was on the deed, I'd added him 5 years ago, thinking it would make things easier when I died, thinking it was a gift to my son who'd have one less thing to worry about when I was gone. He had the legal right to force me out. My birthday gift to him, my attempt to ensure his security, had become the weapon he'd used to make me homeless. The letter was signed by a lawyer I'd never met, representing a son who apparently couldn't even tell me to my face that he wanted me gone. A son who'd hired strangers to do his dirty work, who'd reduced our relationship to legal terms and formal notices. I sat at the kitchen table, the table where I'd fed him breakfast before school for 13 years, where I'd helped him with homework while working double shifts, where I'd celebrated every accomplishment and comforted every disappointment, and I felt something inside me finally break. Not my heart this time. That had been breaking in small pieces for months, each crack so tiny that I could pretend it wasn't happening. This was different. This was the final severing of hope, the death of the illusion I'd been clinging to that maybe, somehow, things would get better. That maybe David would remember who I was and what I'd done for him. That maybe love could bridge the distance that had grown between us. But you can't bridge a distance when the other person is actively building walls. I heard their car in the driveway an hour later. They were laughing about something as they came through the door, their voices light and carefree. The sound cut through me like glass. I waited until they'd settled in, until I heard them moving around in their bedroom. Then I walked down the hallway, that same hallway where I'd once heard David call me disgusting, and I knocked on their door. "Come in," Vanessa called. I opened the door and stood in the threshold, the letter clutched in my hand. They were both there, David sitting on the bed with his laptop, Vanessa organizing her jewelry on the dresser. They looked up at me, and something in my expression must have warned them because David's face immediately became guarded. "I received this today," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in my hands. I held up the letter. "From your lawyer." David had the decency to look uncomfortable at least. He closed his laptop and stood up, but he didn't move toward me. "Mama, we were going to talk to you about that." "Were you?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. "When? After I was already evicted? After the sheriff showed up to forcibly remove me from my own house?" "It's not like that," he said, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. We need our own space. This arrangement isn't working anymore." "This arrangement." I repeated his words slowly, tasting the bitterness of them. "This arrangement where you've lived rent-free in my house for 2 years? Where I've cooked your meals and cleaned your rooms and given you money whenever you asked? That arrangement?" "We've contributed," Vanessa interjected, her voice defensive. "We've paid for groceries sometimes, and utilities." "Sometimes," I echoed. "You've paid for groceries sometimes, while living in a house you pay no rent for." "While I've worked extra hours to cover the bills and give you money for your car repairs and your clothes and your trips and—" "We never asked you to do that," David interrupted. "You offered. Every single time, you offered." And there it was. The truth that lived underneath all the polite lies we'd been telling each other. Yes, I'd offered. Because what choice did I have? Watch my son struggle when I had resources I could share? Say no and risk losing him completely? But he'd known. He'd known I was offering from a place of desperation, not abundance. He'd known I was giving him money I couldn't afford to spare. And he'd taken it anyway, every single time, without question or hesitation or apparent guilt. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how defeated. "I don't have enough money saved for first month's rent and a deposit." "I don't have—" "You'll figure something out," Vanessa said, her tone brisk and businesslike, as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than my imminent homelessness. "You're resourceful. You always have been." Resourceful. As if my entire life of making do with less, of stretching dollars until they tore, of sacrificing my own needs to meet everyone else's demands, as if all of that was some kind of admirable skill rather than the exhausting necessity of poverty. "David," I turned to my son, ignoring Vanessa entirely. "Please, look at me." He did, finally. And what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger or hatred. It was indifference. Complete and absolute indifference. I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Nothing more. 60 days, Mama, he said quietly. The letter gives you 60 days. That's plenty of time to find something. With what money? My voice cracked. I've given you everything. My savings, my emergency fund, everything I had. You know this. You know I have nothing left. That's not our responsibility, Vanessa said, and David didn't contradict her. I looked at them both. This man I'd given birth to, this woman he'd chosen over me, and I understood with perfect clarity that I was alone, completely alone. The child I'd sacrificed everything for would watch me become homeless without losing a single night's sleep. I added your name to this house because I loved you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I wanted you to have security. I wanted you to know that no matter what happened to me, you'd have something solid, something permanent. That was my gift to you. And now it's ours, Vanessa said simply. That's how gifts work. Once you give them, you don't get to control what happens to them. She wasn't wrong. Legally, she wasn't wrong. But there are kinds of right and wrong that exist outside courtrooms and legal documents. Kinds that have to do with basic human decency and the unspoken contracts between parents and children. I left their room without another word. What else was there to say? They'd made their decision. They'd consulted lawyers and drafted formal eviction notices. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could clear up with the right explanation. This was intentional, calculated cruelty. That night, I took the box from the back of my closet. The one I hadn't opened in years. The one I'd promised Roberto I'd never open unless absolutely necessary. My hands shook as I lifted the lid and looked at the contents I'd tried so hard to forget. Documents, photographs, letters, evidence of things that happened before David was born. Things Roberto and I had buried so deeply that sometimes I could almost convince myself they'd never happened at all. But they had happened. And they mattered. And maybe, it was finally time for the truth to come out. I spread the documents across my bed, reading through them one by one. Bank statements from an account David didn't know existed. Property deeds for land. Roberto had bought 30 years ago, back when this area was nothing but farmland and dirt roads, before the city expanded and property values skyrocketed. Insurance policies that had matured and been rolled over into investments I'd never touched, never even thought about, because Roberto had told me to forget about them, to pretend they didn't exist. This is for emergencies only, he'd said on his deathbed, his voice weak but urgent. For if things get really bad. But Teresa, promise me. Don't tell David about this unless you absolutely have to. Promise me. I'd promised. And I'd kept that promise for 23 years, through poverty and struggle and endless hardship. I'd lived as if these resources didn't exist, as if I truly had nothing, because Roberto had been so insistent that the money stay hidden. But why? I'd never fully understood his reasoning. He'd been delirious toward the end, saying strange things about protecting David, about keeping secrets safe. I'd assumed it was the fever talking, the morphine making him paranoid. Now, reading through the documents with clearer eyes, I began to understand. There were names I recognized, business partners Roberto had mentioned occasionally, deals that had gone wrong, money that had changed hands under circumstances that were never quite explained. And there, at the bottom of the box, a letter addressed to me in Roberto's handwriting. I'd never opened it, had been too grief-stricken at the time and then too busy surviving to think about mysterious letters from my dead husband. I opened it now, my heart pounding. My dearest Teresa, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've needed to open this box. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the burden I'm about to place on you. But there are things you need to know. Things about David. Things I should have told you years ago, but I was too much of a coward. The truth is? I read the letter once, twice, 3 times. Each reading made my hands shake harder, made my breath come faster, made the room spin around me. Oh, Roberto. Oh, my love. What did you do? What secret did you keep from me all these years? And suddenly I understood why he'd insisted the money stay hidden, why he'd made me promise not to tell David unless absolutely necessary. Why he'd used his dying breaths to warn me about protecting our son from a truth that would destroy everything David thought he knew about himself, about us, about where he came from. I sat there in the darkness of my small bedroom, surrounded by documents and secrets and the ghost of a man who'd tried to protect us both even from beyond the grave. And I made a decision. The truth would come out. Not all of it. Some secrets were too dangerous, too destructive, but enough. Enough to change everything. I had 60 days, the letter had said. 60 days to vacate the premises, to disappear quietly from my son's life, and make myself convenient by becoming invisible. But 60 days was also enough time to make sure David understood exactly what he was throwing away. Enough time to ensure that when I left, he'd remember me. Not as the fat, disgusting woman who hovered too much, but as the person who'd held his entire world together while he was busy tearing it apart. I gathered the documents carefully, returning most of them to the box, but keeping a few key pieces out. These I placed in my purse, along with Roberto's letter. Tomorrow I'd make some phone calls, visit some offices, set things in motion that couldn't be stopped once they started. For 23 years I'd kept Roberto's secrets. I'd lived in poverty while money sat in accounts I never touched. I'd accepted my role as the convenient, useful mother, who gave and gave until there was nothing left to give. But that woman, that endlessly sacrificing, endlessly forgiving woman, had just received her eviction notice, and the person who would replace her was someone David had never met. Someone who'd been sleeping for a very long time. Someone who remembered everything, and who was finally done being invisible. The morning after reading Roberto's letter, I woke up different. Not suddenly strong or confident. I was still the same tired, aging woman who'd been discarded by her own son. But something had shifted. A kind of quiet determination had settled over me like a familiar coat, heavy but protective. I made breakfast as usual, but I didn't call them to the table. I ate alone, slowly, tasting my food for the first time in months. The eggs were slightly overcooked, the toast a bit dry. But it was mine. I wasn't performing for anyone. Wasn't hoping for approval that would never come. After washing my single plate and cup, I dressed in my best outfit, the navy blue dress I'd worn to David's graduation, pressed and hanging in my closet waiting for an occasion that never seemed appropriate enough. Today felt appropriate. Today I was going to start reclaiming something I'd lost, though I wasn't entirely sure what that something was yet. The first stop was the bank. Not the local branch where I kept my meager checking account, but the downtown office Roberto had mentioned in his letter. First National Trust, a name that sounded solid and expensive, the kind of place I'd never imagined having business with. The building was all marble and polished brass, with high ceilings that made me feel small and out of place. Women in tailored suits moved through the lobby with purpose, their heels clicking against the floor with the confidence of people who belonged in spaces like this. I almost turned around and left. But then I remembered David's face when he'd told me to vacate the premises, the indifference in his eyes, the ease with which he'd thrown away decades of sacrifice as if they meant nothing. I approached the reception desk and handed the woman my identification along with the account number Roberto had written in his letter. "I need to speak with someone about this account," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The receptionist's expression changed as she looked at the number. Her professional smile became more genuine, more attentive. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Let me get someone for you right away. Please have a seat." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man named Richard Chen, who looked too young to be a vice president of anything but who treated me with a respect I hadn't experienced in years. He pulled up information on his computer, his eyes widening slightly as he scrolled through whatever he was seeing. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to say, it's unusual for accounts of this magnitude to go untouched for so long." "Most clients with your level of assets are quite active in managing their portfolios." "My level of assets?" I repeated, not sure I'd heard correctly. He turned his monitor toward me and pointed to a number that didn't make sense. Too many digits. It had to be a mistake. "The original investment your husband made in 1998 has grown substantially over the years," Mr. Chen explained. Combined with the property holdings that were liquidated and rolled into the investment account in 2005, and accounting for compound interest over 2 decades. He paused, seeing my expression. "Mrs. Morrison, are you all right? Would you like some water?" I nodded, unable to speak. He called his assistant, who brought water in a glass that looked like it cost more than my weekly groceries. I sipped it slowly while Mr. Chen continued explaining things I barely understood. Portfolios and dividends and market performance and terms that sounded like a foreign language. "In simpler terms," he finally said, perhaps taking pity on my confusion, "you have approximately $2.3 million in liquid assets. That's not counting the property portfolio, which is held in a separate trust. $2.3 million. The number was so absurd that I almost laughed. I'd been living on less than $15,000 a year, working retail shifts that destroyed my knees, giving my son money I couldn't afford to spare. And all the while, I'd been a millionaire. "Why?" I asked. "Why would my husband hide this from me? Why would he make me live like we had nothing when we had all this?" Mr. Chen's expression became uncomfortable, the look of someone who'd been privy to confidential information he wasn't supposed to share. "I can't speak to your husband's motivations, Mrs. Morrison, but I can tell you that when he set up this account, he left very specific instructions. The money was to remain untouched until either you accessed it yourself or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" "Or until a specific condition was met. He was very clear about this. The account could only be accessed if you came here in person with certain documents, or if—" He pulled out a file, flipping through pages until he found what he was looking for. If your son attempted to claim any legal rights to your primary residence. The room seemed to tilt. He knew, I whispered. Roberto knew this might happen? Your husband was a very cautious man, Mrs. Morrison. He'd had some business dealings that made him wary of certain situations. He wanted to ensure you'd always be protected, but he also wanted to make sure the money couldn't be found or claimed by anyone except you, under specific circumstances. I thought about Roberto's letter, the parts I hadn't fully understood, the references to protecting David from knowledge that might destroy him, the insistence that some secrets were too dangerous to share. There's more, isn't there? I asked. Something else he didn't want David to know. Mr. Chen closed the file carefully. There are sealed documents in your husband's file that I'm not authorized to open. They can only be accessed by you, and only if you specifically request them. Your husband left instructions that you should think very carefully before reading them, as some knowledge once gained can't be forgotten. I sat there in that expensive office, surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined having access to, and I felt the weight of Roberto's protections settling over me like a blessing and a curse. He'd given me resources I desperately needed, but he'd also left me with choices I didn't know how to make. I need time to think, I said finally, but I'd like to access some of the funds, enough to secure my own housing. Of course. How much would you like to transfer to your checking account? I thought about modest apartments, security deposits, first and last month's rent. Maybe $10,000? Mr. Chen smiled gently. Mrs. Morrison, given your current financial position, I'd recommend something more substantial. Shall we say $100,000 to start? That will give you flexibility while you make decisions about your long-term situation. $100,000. The number still felt unreal. Play money in a game I didn't know I was playing. But I nodded, and he began processing paperwork that would transfer more money than I'd earned in 6 years of work into my checking account by the end of the business day. As I left the bank, the world looked different. The same streets, the same buildings, but I was seeing them with new eyes. I wasn't the desperate, impoverished woman who'd walked in. I had options now, choices, power. The second stop was harder. The law office of Morrison and Chen, the firm that had sent me the eviction notice. I'd called ahead, insisting on an appointment with the senior partner who'd signed the letter. Harold Morrison was older than I'd expected, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed at odds with the cruel document his office had produced. He stood when I entered, offering his hand and a chair across from his large mahogany desk. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming in. I understand this situation has been difficult for you. Do you? I asked, and something in my tone made him pause. Do you understand what it's like to be evicted from your own home by your own son? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Your son came to us seeking legal advice about the property. He explained that the living situation had become untenable, that there were irreconcilable differences. What did he tell you? I interrupted. Exactly what did David say about me? Mr. A. Morrison hesitated, attorney-client privilege warring with something that looked like conscience. Perhaps it would be better if we focused on finding a resolution that works for everyone involved. No, I said firmly. I want to know. What lies did my son tell you to justify throwing his mother into the street? The lawyer sighed, pulling out a file. He said you'd become difficult, that you were interfering in his marriage, creating conflict between him and his wife. That despite his repeated requests for privacy and boundaries, you continued to overstep. He painted a picture of a mother who couldn't accept that her son had grown up and moved on with his life. Each word was a small knife. David had rewritten our entire history, transforming himself from ungrateful son into victim of an overbearing mother. My sacrifices had become interference. My presence had become intrusion. My love had become the problem he needed to solve. I see, I said quietly. And did my son mention that the house he's evicting me from is the house I bought? That I added his name to the deed as a gift, not as a transfer of ownership? That he and his wife have lived there rent-free for 2 years, while I worked retail shifts to pay the bills? Mr. Morrison's expression changed. No, he did not mention those details. Did he mention that I've given them thousands of dollars from my limited savings? That I've cooked their meals, cleaned their space, made myself as invisible as possible to avoid being accused of hovering? That the only crime I've committed is existing in my own home while they built their life on the foundation of my sacrifice? The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Morrison, if what you're telling me is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt you, then your son may have misrepresented the situation to us. However, legally speaking, because his name is on the deed as joint owner, he does have the right to request that you vacate. Even though I'm the one who bought it? Even though I'm the one who's been paying to maintain it? Unfortunately, yes. The law doesn't always align with justice. Joint ownership means either party can occupy the property or request that the other party leave. It's one of the vulnerabilities of adding someone to your deed without proper legal protections in place. I reached into my purse and pulled out a document I'd brought from the bank. What if I told you I have the financial resources to purchase another property? What if I told you I'm no longer the desperate, impoverished woman my son believes me to be? Mr. Morrison looked at the bank statement I'd placed on his desk, his eyebrows rising as he took in the numbers. That does change things. With these resources, you have many options available to you. I want to understand my rights, I said. All of them. If David wants the house, he can have it. But I want to know what I'm legally entitled to, what claims I can make for the money I've put into the property, for the value I've added over 15 years of mortgage payments. The lawyer began explaining concepts I'd never considered: equity, financial contribution, unjust enrichment. He talked about documentation I should have kept, receipts and records that would prove my investment in the property. I'd kept none of it, of course. Who keeps receipts when you trust your own son? But as we talked, a picture began to emerge. Yes, David had legal claim to the house. But I had moral claim, and sometimes moral claims could be translated into financial ones if you had the right lawyer and the willingness to fight. If you wanted to challenge this, Mr. Morrison said carefully, if you wanted to force a sale of the property and claim your share of the equity, you'd need representation. Obviously, I can't represent you given that your son is my client. But I can recommend someone. He wrote a name and number on his business card and slid it across the desk. This woman is the best. She specializes in family law and elder financial abuse cases. If anyone can help you navigate this situation, it's her. Elder financial abuse. The term hit me hard. That's what this was, wasn't it? My own son, exploiting my love and trust, taking advantage of my resources while planning to discard me once I'd served my purpose. "Thank you," I said, taking the card. "I'll think about what I want to do." As I stood to leave, Mr. Morrison spoke again. "Mrs. Morrison, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. If I'd known the full situation, I might have advised your son differently. There are better ways to handle family conflicts than eviction notices and legal force." I nodded, but said nothing. Sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't undo the cruelty or heal the wounds. Sorry was just a word people used when they wanted to feel better about the harm they'd participated in. That evening, I returned to the house. My house, the one I'd worked for, sacrificed for, the one I was apparently no longer welcome in. David and Vanessa were in the living room watching television, comfortable and relaxed in the space they'd stolen from me. I didn't join them, didn't announce my presence. I simply went to my small bedroom and began making plans. I had 60 days, but I wouldn't need that long. 1 week, maybe 2, to find a place of my own. Something better than this house, something that was truly mine, that no one could take from me. And then I would decide what to do about the rest. The sealed documents at the bank. The secrets Roberto had kept. The truth that might destroy David's understanding of everything he thought he knew about his family. Part of me wanted to walk away cleanly, to take my money and disappear from their lives as completely as they'd erased me from theirs. Let them have the house. Let them have their comfortable delusions. Let them never know that the poor, desperate mother they'd discarded had actually been their salvation all along. But another part of me, a part I'd kept buried for so long that I'd almost forgotten it existed, wanted justice. Not revenge exactly, just acknowledgement, recognition, an admission that I had mattered, that my sacrifices had meaning, that you couldn't just erase someone who'd given you everything without consequences. I fell asleep that night not with despair, but with something that felt almost like anticipation. The woman who'd been breaking apart piece by piece was still there, still wounded, still grieving the loss of a son who'd never really been the person she'd thought he was. But underneath that woman, someone else was stirring, someone stronger, someone who'd been silent for too long, someone who was finally ready to speak. The apartment I found was nothing like the cramped bedroom I'd been living in. It was on the 4th floor of a newer building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in so much natural light I had to squint the first time I walked in. 2 bedrooms, an actual dining area, and a kitchen with appliances that didn't require prayer and patience to function properly. The leasing agent smiled when I handed her the cashier's check for the first year's rent, paid in full. "It's unusual for tenants to pay so far in advance," she said, "but we certainly appreciate it. You'll have priority status for any building amenities and maintenance requests." Priority status. As if I was someone who mattered, someone whose comfort and needs were worth prioritizing. The concept felt foreign after years of making myself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I signed the lease in my name only. No one else had claim to this space. No one else could take it from me or make me feel like a guest in my own home. This was mine in a way nothing had been mine for a very long time. Over the next week, I furnished the apartment slowly, carefully. Not with cheap pieces from discount stores, but with quality furniture that would last. A comfortable sofa in deep blue fabric, a dining table made of solid wood, big enough for 4 people even though I'd probably always eat alone. A bed with a real mattress, the kind that didn't leave you aching when you woke up. Each purchase felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. The woman who chose this lamp, who selected these curtains, who decided that, yes, she deserved Egyptian cotton sheets, that woman had always existed inside me. She'd just been buried under years of sacrifice and self-denial. I didn't tell David and Vanessa about the apartment, didn't mention the bank account or the meetings with lawyers or any of it. I continued my routine at the house as if nothing had changed, making meals they barely touched, keeping spaces clean they didn't acknowledge, existing in my small room while they occupied the rest. But I watched them now, really watched them, and I saw things I'd been too close to see before. I saw how Vanessa ordered David around, her tone sharp and demanding when she thought I couldn't hear. "David, I told you to pick up my dry cleaning." "Why is this so difficult for you?" "David, I need you to call the insurance company. I don't have time for this." "David, can you at least pretend to care about what I'm saying?" I saw how David's shoulders slumped when she criticized him, how his voice became defensive and small. "I forgot, okay? I've been busy with work." "I'll call them tomorrow, I promise." "I am listening, I saw how they argued about money constantly, their voices rising behind the closed bedroom door. Vanessa wanted things, always more things, and David was apparently not providing them fast enough. A bigger car, a vacation to somewhere expensive, jewelry that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "Your promotion should have come through by now," I heard Vanessa say one night, her voice cutting through the walls. "Everyone else in your department is moving up. What's wrong with you?" "I'm trying," David said, and he sounded tired. So tired. "It's not that simple." "Nothing is ever simple with you. Your mother's the same way. Poor, helpless, always needing something." I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the vibration of their argument, and I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. David wasn't happy. He'd traded his integrity and his mother's love for a woman who didn't even seem to like him very much, for a life that looked good from the outside but was apparently hollow at its core. Part of me, the mother part that would never completely die no matter how much he hurt me, felt sorry for him. But another part, the part that was learning to protect itself, felt something colder. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen this life, this woman, this version of himself that could discard the person who'd sacrificed everything for him. Now he could live with that choice. 10 days after signing the lease on my apartment, I came home to find Vanessa in the kitchen going through my mail. Not just sorting it, actually opening envelopes addressed to me, reading contents that were none of her business. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. She looked up, startled, but not embarrassed. "I was looking for the utility bill. We need to know how much we owe this month." "Those aren't utility bills. That's my personal mail." She shrugged, setting down an envelope from the bank. "We're all family here." "What's the big deal?" I walked over and gathered the opened envelopes, my hands trembling with an anger I'd been suppressing for too long. "The big deal is that you don't have the right to open my mail. That's actually illegal, in case you weren't aware." "Oh, don't be so dramatic." she said, rolling her eyes. What are you hiding anyway? Secret boyfriend? Lottery winnings? She said it sarcastically, meaning it as a joke. But I saw her eyes dart back to the bank envelope, saw the wheels turning in her mind. She'd seen something in that statement, some number that didn't fit with her image of me as poor, desperate, dependent. I'm moving out, I said, the words coming out before I'd consciously decided to speak them. In 3 days. So you won't have to worry about my mail or my presence or anything else about me much longer. Vanessa's expression changed, cycling through surprise, satisfaction, and then something that looked almost like suspicion. Moving out? Where? Did you find some kind of subsidized housing or something? The assumption that I could only afford poverty housing, that my options were limited to whatever scraps the social safety net might provide, it would have hurt a week ago. Now it just felt like confirmation that she'd never seen me as a real person, only as an obstacle and a resource. Something like that, I said, not bothering to correct her. David came home an hour later, and Vanessa immediately pulled him into their bedroom. I heard their urgent whispers, caught fragments of conversation. Moving out in 3 days. About time. Saw her bank statement, David. Something's not right. What do you mean? More money than she should have. I smiled to myself, there in my small room, packing my belongings into boxes I'd bought with money they knew nothing about. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them realize, too late, that maybe they didn't know everything about the woman they'd so easily dismissed. That evening, David knocked on my door. When I opened it, he had the decency to look uncomfortable. Vanessa said you're moving out. Yes. You did give me an eviction notice, remember? 60 days to vacate? I'm just doing it sooner than required. Where are you going? He tried to make it sound casual, concerned even. But I could hear the edge underneath. He was worried about something. Does it matter? Of course it matters. You're my mother. I want to make sure you're going somewhere safe, somewhere you can afford. Afford? I laughed, and it came out bitter. Now you're worried about what I can afford. After taking thousands of dollars from me? After forcing me out of my own house? That's not fair, Mama. We needed help, and you offered. I offered because I'm your mother, and I love you. But love isn't supposed to be this one-directional thing where I give everything and you take everything, and then discard me when I've served my purpose. He flinched. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable. Let him face, even for a moment, what he'd done. I never meant for things to be like this, he said quietly. It got complicated. No, David. It got simple. You chose your wife over your mother. You chose comfort over loyalty. You chose to believe I was disgusting and hovering rather than loving and supportive. Those were choices. Your choices. Own them. I saw the moment the words registered, saw his face pale. You heard that? That night when I said, yes, I heard everything. Did you think words like that just disappear? That they don't leave marks? He looked genuinely stricken now, which should have made me feel better, but somehow just made me feel empty. I didn't mean it. I was just... Vanessa was upset, and I was trying to... To what? Make her feel better by degrading me? To bond with your wife over shared contempt for the woman who gave birth to you? No, I I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. Sorry. That word again. The word that was supposed to fix everything but actually fixed nothing. Do you know what your father's last words to me were? I asked, not waiting for him to answer. He said, "Take care of our boy. Make sure he becomes a good man." I promised him I would. I spent 23 years trying to keep that promise, working myself to exhaustion, sacrificing everything I had, giving you opportunities I never had. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle between us. But I failed. Because a good man doesn't treat his mother like garbage. A good man doesn't take and take and take without ever giving back. A good man doesn't evict the woman who raised him so he can be more comfortable. I don't know who you became, David, but you're not the son I raised. And you're not the man your father hoped you'd be. He stood there, tears running down his face, and I felt nothing. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort him, that would have said, "It's okay, I forgive you, let's fix this." That part had died somewhere between the eviction notice and the bank statement showing I'd been a millionaire while living like a pauper. "I'll be gone by Thursday," I said. "You'll have your house, your space, your life without me hovering in it. I hope it's everything you wanted." I closed the door in his face and returned to my packing. Two days before I was scheduled to move, I did something I'd been putting off. I went back to the bank and asked Mr. Chen for the sealed documents, the ones Roberto had left with instructions that I should think carefully before opening them. I'd thought carefully, and I'd decided I needed to know. Whatever secret my husband had kept, whatever truth he'd tried to protect us from, it was time. Mr. Chen brought me to a private room and handed me a thick manila envelope with my name written in Roberto's handwriting. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be at my desk if you have questions." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were documents I had to read 3 times before I understood what they meant. Birth certificates, adoption papers, letters from lawyers dated before David was born. Photographs of people I didn't know but whose features I recognized in David's face. My son, the boy I'd raised, the child I'd thought was mine and Roberto's, had been adopted. We'd adopted him as an infant from a woman who'd been Roberto's cousin, a woman who'd gotten pregnant at 15 and couldn't keep the baby. It had been a private arrangement, handled quietly within the family to avoid scandal. Roberto had been adamant that we never tell David. "He's our son," Roberto had insisted. "Biology doesn't matter. We tell him the truth, and he'll always wonder, always feel like he doesn't really belong to us. Better to let him believe what makes him feel secure." I'd agreed at the time, young and in love and trusting my husband's judgment. We'd moved to a new city before David was born, told everyone he was ours biologically. Only a few family members knew the truth, and they'd been sworn to secrecy. But now, reading through the documents, I understood why Roberto had been so insistent about hiding the money. David's biological mother, Roberto's cousin, had died when David was 5 in a car accident. But her parents, David's biological grandparents, were still alive. And they were wealthy, very wealthy. According to the documents, There was a trust fund, a substantial one, set up by David's biological grandfather for his grandson. The money had been held in trust until David turned 30, at which point he'd gain access to it, but only if certain conditions were met. The primary condition: he had to maintain a relationship with his adoptive mother, with me. I sat there in the private bank room, surrounded by secrets and lies and good intentions that had created this impossible situation, and I laughed. It was either laugh or cry, and I'd done enough crying. Roberto had protected me after all. In his own complicated way, he'd ensured that David would have reason to value me, to maintain our relationship, to never do exactly what he'd just done, cast me aside when I was no longer convenient. The trust was worth $4 million. David had no idea it existed. No idea that his 30th birthday, which was coming up in 6 months, would have brought him wealth beyond anything he'd earned himself, if only he'd treated his mother with basic decency. But there was more. A letter from Roberto, written just before he died. "Teresa, my love, if you're reading this, it means David has done something unforgivable. It means my greatest fear has come true, that he's become the kind of man who could hurt you. I'm so sorry. I should have told him the truth from the beginning. Should have made sure he understood how lucky he was to have you as his mother. Biology be damned. The trust fund was my insurance policy. A way to ensure he'd always have reason to value you, to treat you well. But insurance policies only work if people know they exist. You have a choice now. You can tell him about the trust. Let him know what he's about to lose if he continues down this path. Or you can keep the secret, let him lose the money he never knew he had, and walk away clean. Whatever you choose, know this: you are the best thing that ever happened to me and to our boy." If he can't see that, he doesn't deserve the gift his biological grandfather wanted to give him. The money will revert to the estate, and you, as my widow and David's legal mother, will inherit half of it along with his biological family. I love you, Teresa. I always have. I'm sorry I left you alone to deal with this mess I created. You're Roberto. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope with all the other documents. Then I sat there in the silence, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange way life circles back on itself. In 6 months, David would lose $4 million he never knew he had. He'd lose it because he'd failed the one condition his biological grandfather had required, that he honor and care for the woman who'd raised him. And I would gain $2 million on top of what I already had. Payment for years of sacrifice, compensation for a broken heart, restitution for a son who'd forgotten what love was supposed to look like. Justice, Roberto had called it. Strange, delayed, complicated justice. But justice nonetheless. Moving day arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth for October. I'd hired professional movers, not because I had much to move, but because I wanted David and Vanessa to see that I wasn't slinking away in defeat. I was leaving on my terms, with dignity, with resources they knew nothing about. The movers arrived at 8 in the morning, 3 efficient men who loaded my boxes and furniture with practiced ease. David and Vanessa stood in the hallway watching, their expressions confused and increasingly alarmed as they saw the quality of the moving service, the careful way the men handled my belongings as if they were valuable. "Mama," David said as I supervised the last box being carried out. "Can we talk, please?" I looked at him. really looked at him, and tried to find the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing streets, who used to tell me I was beautiful even in my shabby clothes and tired face. But that boy was gone, if he'd ever truly existed outside my imagination. "What is there to talk about?" I asked. "Where you're going? How you can afford all this?" He gestured at the movers, at the new suitcases I'd bought, at the clothes I was wearing that weren't from discount stores. "Vanessa saw your bank statement. You have money we didn't know about." "We?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean money you didn't know about? Money you couldn't access and take from me?" Vanessa had emerged from the bedroom now, her arms crossed, her expression suspicious and calculating. "Where did that money come from, Teresa? Did someone die? Did you win something?" The assumption that I couldn't have earned it, couldn't have had resources of my own, it was almost funny. "My financial situation is no longer any of your concern," I said calmly. "You made that clear when you hired a lawyer to evict me." "But you're my mother," David said, and there was a note of panic in his voice now. "We should know where you're going, how to reach you. Why? So you can ask for more money? So you can track me down when you need something else from me?" I shook my head. "I've given you everything I had to give, David. There's nothing left for you to take." The head mover approached with a clipboard. "Ma'am, we're all loaded up. Ready to head to the new address?" "Yes, thank you." I signed the paperwork and turned back to David and Vanessa one last time. "The house is yours now. Fully yours." "I hope it brings you all the happiness you thought it would." "Mama, please." David reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't. You don't get to touch me with affection now, after months of treating me like something disgusting you couldn't wait to be rid of. You don't get to pretend we're family when it's convenient for you." "I'm sorry," he said, and tears were streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was cruel. Please let me make it right." Some things can't be made right, David. Some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. I picked up my purse and took one last look at the house I'd worked so hard to buy, the home I'd thought would always be mine. Goodbye. I walked out without looking back, got into my car, and followed the moving truck to my new apartment. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, his voice breaking with sobs. But I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't let the sound of his pain make me reconsider. I'd spent too many years prioritizing his pain over my own. Today, for the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself. The new apartment looked even better with my furniture arranged in it. The movers were efficient and respectful, placing everything exactly where I directed. When they left, I stood in the middle of my living room, in my apartment, that no one could take from me. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Quiet. Tentative peace. I spent the next week settling in, learning the rhythms of my new neighborhood. There was a cafe downstairs where I could get good coffee and sit by the window watching people pass. A small park 3 blocks away where elderly people gathered in the mornings to do Tai Chi. A library within walking distance, quiet and full of books I could get lost in. I bought myself new clothes, not from thrift stores but from actual boutiques where saleswomen called me ma'am and offered styling advice. I got my hair cut and colored at a real salon, covering the gray I'd ignored for years. I bought good shoes that didn't hurt my feet, a warm coat for winter, small luxuries I'd denied myself while giving David money for things he wanted but didn't need. I was rediscovering who Teresa Morrison was when she wasn't defined entirely by being someone's mother, someone's resource, someone's burden. David called 17 times in the first week. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from apologetic to angry to desperate to resigned. I listened to them once each, then deleted them. His words were noise now, meaningless sounds from someone who'd lost the right to demand my attention. Vanessa called once, her message brief and cold. "We need to discuss the financial arrangements for the house. Call me back." As if I owed her anything. As if she had any claim on my time or my attention or my resources. I didn't call either of them back. 2 weeks after moving out, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Morrison? This is Patricia Chen from the law firm of Chen & Associates. Harold Morrison referred you to me?" The lawyer specializing in elder financial abuse. I'd forgotten about the card he'd given me. "Yes," I said. "Though I'm not sure I need legal representation anymore. I've moved out of the house." "I understand, but Mr. Morrison thought you might want to explore your options regarding compensation for your financial contributions to the property. Would you be willing to meet with me? Just a consultation, no obligation." I agreed, more out of curiosity than any real expectation of getting money back. The house was David's now. What was done was done. But Patricia Chen turned out to be a revelation. Sharp, mid-50s, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from years of fighting battles most people didn't even know needed fighting. "Tell me everything," she said when I sat across from her in her office. "From the beginning. When you bought the house, when you added your son to the deed, all of it." I told her. All of it. The years of sacrifice, the mortgage payments, the money I'd given David and Vanessa, the eviction notice, everything. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and never once looked at me with pity or judgment. "You have a case," she said when I finished. "A strong one. We can force a sale of the property and claim your portion of the equity, which, given that you paid the mortgage for 15 years before adding him to the deed, would be substantial. We can also pursue claims for the money you gave them under what we call undue influence. The fact that they were living in your home, rent-free, creates a power dynamic that makes their requests for money potentially coercive." "I don't know if I want to fight," I admitted. "Part of me just wants to be done with all of it." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to be honest with you. What your son did, taking advantage of your generosity, using your love against you, discarding you when you were no longer useful, it's more common than you'd think. And most of the time, mothers like you walk away because fighting feels too painful, too exhausting, too much like admitting that the child you loved could really be that cruel." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But here's what I've learned in 20 years of doing this work. When you walk away without holding people accountable, you're not just letting them get away with hurting you. You're teaching them that their behavior was acceptable, that love can be exploited without consequences, that the people who sacrifice for them can be discarded without cost." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting you fight. Not because you need the money. You clearly don't. but because your son needs to understand that his actions had consequences. Real, tangible, expensive consequences. Sometimes that's the only language people like him understand. I thought about David's face when I'd walked out. The tears, the apologies, the panic when he realized I wasn't just moving to another room in his house, but moving out of his reach entirely. And if he can't pay? I asked. If forcing a sale of the house ruins him financially? Patricia shrugged. Then he'll learn what it's like to struggle, what it's like to rebuild from nothing, what you did for years while he was busy taking advantage of your sacrifice. She leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, you don't owe him protection from the consequences of his choices. You never did. I left her office with a retainer agreement and a court date. I'd authorized her to proceed with legal action, not because I wanted revenge, but because she was right. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. A month after I moved out, I received a call from David, not from his regular number, but from his office phone. I answered, curious. Mama. His voice was strained, exhausted. Please, I need to talk to you. What is it, David? Vanessa left me. I should have felt something. Sympathy, satisfaction, concern. Instead, I felt nothing. His marriage troubles weren't my problem anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I meant it in the abstract way you mean it when you hear about bad things happening to strangers. She said she couldn't be with someone so weak, someone who couldn't even stand up for himself, who let his mother... He choked on the words. She said terrible things about me, about us, about how pathetic our marriage was. Why are you telling me this? Because I need help. I need somewhere to stay while I figure things out. The house feels too big and empty, and I can't afford it on my own without her income, and... No. The word hung in the air between us. No? He repeated, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. No, David. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not the person you turn to when everything else falls apart. You made very clear that I was disgusting and hovering, that having me in your life was an unbearable burden. You evicted me from my own home. You chose your wife over your mother at every turn, so no. Figure it out yourself. But you're my mother. And you're my son. But being family doesn't mean I have to let you keep hurting me. It doesn't mean I have to keep sacrificing my peace, my resources, my dignity for someone who's shown me over and over that he doesn't value any of it. I made mistakes, he said, his voice breaking. I know I did, but everyone makes mistakes. Don't I deserve a second chance? You had second chances, David. Dozens of them. Every time you took money from me while planning to evict me. Every time you let your wife insult me in my own home. Every time you chose your comfort over my well-being. You had chance after chance to be better, to do better. You chose not to take any of them. So what? You're just done with me. I'm your son, and you're just walking away? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. You walked away first, David. You walked away the moment you decided I was an embarrassment instead of a blessing. I'm just finally accepting what you made clear. We're not family anymore. We're just two people who used to know each other. I'm losing everything, he whispered. The house, Vanessa. My promotion at work fell through. Everything's falling apart. Then you know how I felt, I said quietly. When you decided to throw me out with nothing. When you took everything I'd given you and demanded more. When you made me feel like I was worthless. I never meant... Yes, you did. You meant every word, every action. You just didn't think there would be consequences. I paused. There's something else you should know. You'll be getting papers from my attorney soon. I'm suing for my share of the house equity. What? You can't. We had an agreement. We had no agreement. You stole my house using a gift I gave you out of love. Now you're going to pay for that theft. My lawyer says I'm entitled to at least 70% of the equity given my financial contributions. That'll force me to sell. I won't have anywhere to live. Then you'll understand exactly how I felt when you evicted me. The difference is, I was innocent. You're not. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From strength. From finally standing up for myself in a way I should have done months ago. That night, I opened Roberto's letter one more time and read the final paragraph. Teresa, my love, if you're reading this far, it means you've made your choice. Whatever you decide about the trust fund, about David, about everything, I support you. You've earned the right to choose yourself. You've earned peace. You've earned justice, even if it comes at the cost of the son we both loved. Some children need to fall before they can learn to stand on their own. Let him fall, mi amor. Let him learn, and you fly. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my new desk, in my new apartment, in my new life. In 5 months, David would turn 30. In 5 months, he'd lose $4 million he never knew existed. He'd lose it because he'd failed the one test his biological grandfather had set for him. Treat your mother with love and respect. And I would gain half of it, because the trust's conditions specified that if David failed, the money would be split between his biological family and his adoptive mother. 8 million reasons to be grateful I'd finally learned to choose myself. 8 million reminders that sometimes justice takes time. But it always comes. David's 30th birthday fell on a Tuesday in March, one of those gray days when winter refuses to release its grip and spring feels like a broken promise that may never be kept. I woke in my apartment, my beautiful, peaceful apartment, and lay in bed for a long time, thinking about the phone call that would come later today. The trust administrator had contacted me 2 weeks earlier to confirm the details. At precisely 10 o'clock this morning, David would receive notification about the trust fund. He'd be informed of its existence, its value, and the fact that he'd forfeited it entirely by violating the relationship clause with his adoptive mother. $4 million. Gone. Because he'd called me disgusting. Because he'd evicted me from my own home. Because he'd valued his wife's comfort over his mother's well-being. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, justified in my decision to let him face these consequences without warning. But instead, I felt something more complicated, a mixture of sadness, relief, and a strange kind of grief for the relationship we'd never actually had, the one I'd imagined existed, but never really did. My phone rang at 9:30, David's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, and again. On the 4th call, I answered. Mama. His voice was ragged, desperate. Mama, please tell me this isn't real. Please tell me you didn't know about this. So he'd already been contacted. The trust administrator must have called him early. Know about what, David? The trust fund. $4 million from grandparents I never knew I had. The lawyer said I was adopted, that my biological grandfather set up this fund, that I would have gotten it today except— His voice broke. Except I violated some clause about maintaining a relationship with my adoptive mother. That's you. They're talking about you. Yes, I said simply. That's me. You knew. Oh God, you knew about this and you didn't tell me. Your father knew. He left me documents, instructed me to keep them sealed unless certain conditions were met. What conditions? Unless you did something unforgivable to me. Something that proved you didn't deserve the gift your biological grandfather wanted to give you. The silence on the other end was profound. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him processing the magnitude of what this meant. How long have you known? He finally asked. Since the day after you sent me the eviction notice. I found out the same day I found out I was never poor at all, that your father had left me resources I'd been living in poverty while they sat in accounts I didn't know existed. You were never poor? His voice rose in disbelief. All those years, the sacrifices, the extra shifts, the way you gave me money you supposedly couldn't afford. You had money the whole time? I had money I didn't know about. Your father hid it from me, from us, because he was protecting us. Protecting you from this exact moment, actually. He knew that if you understood there was a trust fund contingent on treating me well, you might treat me well for the wrong reasons. He wanted you to value me for who I was, not for what I could give you. But you could have told me. David's voice was anguished now. When you found out, you could have warned me. You could have said something before it was too late. Could I? I asked quietly. Would you have listened? Would you have suddenly started treating me with respect and love because there was money on the line? Or would you have just been acting out of greed instead of genuine affection? That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. You want to talk to me about fair? Was it fair when you called me disgusting? Was it fair when you evicted me from the house I bought with my own labor? Was it fair when you took thousands of dollars from me while planning to throw me out on the street? Tell me, David, which part of any of that was fair? He was crying now, ugly sobbing sounds that once would have broken my heart and sent me rushing to comfort him. Now they just sounded like the consequences of choices finally catching up. I'm so sorry, he choked out. Mama, I'm so sorry for everything. I was terrible to you. I was cruel and selfish, and I took advantage of your love. But please, please, there has to be a way to fix this. Can't you tell them I've changed? Can't you vouch for me somehow? The trust conditions were very clear, I said. You had to maintain a relationship with me through your 30th birthday. Not reconcile after the fact. Not apologize once you found out about the money. Actually treat me with consistent love and respect for 30 years. You failed that test, David. But $4 million is apparently what your relationship with me was worth to your biological grandfather. He set that value because he wanted you to understand that family, real family, the kind built on love and sacrifice rather than biology, matters more than anything. He wanted you to honor the woman who raised you, who chose you, who made you her son in every way that mattered. I did honor you. I loved you. No, David. You loved what I could do for you. You loved having a convenient place to live rent-free. You loved having access to money when you needed it. You loved having someone to cook and clean and make your life easier. But you didn't love me. If you had loved me, you couldn't have treated me the way you did. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that couldn't be unsaid, couldn't be undone. "What happens to the money?" he finally asked, his voice small and defeated. "Half goes back to your biological family, half comes to me, as your adoptive mother and your father's widow. You get $2 million. Yes. Because I failed. Because you made choices that had consequences. Because your biological grandfather was wise enough to know that wealth without character is meaningless, and he wanted to ensure you developed character first." "So you win," David said, and there was bitterness in his voice now. "You get millions of dollars, and I get nothing." "I don't feel like I won, David. I feel like we both lost. I lost the son I thought I had, the one I'd built up in my imagination who was kind and grateful and loving. You lost the opportunity to be that son, and the money that came with it. Nobody wins here. Some of us just survive." "I've lost everything," he whispered. "Vanessa, the house, my promotion, and now this. Everything's gone." "Then you finally understand how I felt when you evicted me. That's what this is about, isn't it? Revenge, punishment, making me suffer because you suffered." "No," I said firmly. "This is about justice, about actions having consequences, about learning that you can't treat people as disposable and expect there to be no cost. If I'd warned you about the trust fund, you would have learned nothing except how to manipulate circumstances for money." "This way, at least you have the opportunity to learn something real." "Learn what? That I'm a terrible person? That I destroyed my own life? I already know that. Learn that love, real love, isn't about what someone can give you. It's about how you treat them when they can't give you anything at all. Learn that your mother was never poor in the ways that mattered. Learn that the greatest wealth is in relationships you honor and protect, not in money you can accumulate." I paused, letting those words settle. Learn that it's never too late to become a better person, even if it's too late to undo the damage you've caused. "How am I supposed to become better?" David asked, and he sounded young suddenly, lost. "I've ruined everything. I don't even know where to start. You start the way I did when you evicted me. You wake up tomorrow and make different choices. You learn to live with less while understanding you actually have more than you realized. You figure out who you are when nobody's giving you anything, when you can't rely on anyone but yourself." "That sounds like what you went through. Your whole life." "Yes," I agreed. "It does. Consider it your inheritance from me. Not money, but the knowledge of how to survive and rebuild when everything falls apart. That's worth more than $4 million, David. You just have to be willing to learn it." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become softer, more genuine than I'd heard in years. "Will you ever forgive me?" "I already have," I said, and I realized it was true. "Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, though. I forgive you for being human, for making terrible choices, for hurting me in ways you may not have fully understood at the time. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to let you back into my life in the way I did before." "That woman who gave everything and expected nothing, she's gone. She had to die so I could live." "Who are you now?" The question caught me off guard. Who was I now? "I'm Teresa Morrison," I said slowly. 64 years old, widow, mother, though that relationship looks different than I thought it would. Woman who survived poverty and heartbreak and betrayal. Woman who learned, too late but not impossibly late, that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Are you happy? David asked, and he sounded like he genuinely wanted to know. I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others. I still wake up sometimes and think about calling you, about checking if you're okay, about falling back into old patterns. But then I remember how small I had to make myself to fit into your life, and I choose myself instead. That's new for me. Choosing myself. I want to be better, David said. I want to be the son you deserve to have. I know it's too late for the money, too late to undo what I did. But maybe it's not too late to become a different person. A better person. That's not for me to judge, I told him. That's between you and whoever you become. But David, if you really want to change, don't do it because you lost $4 million. Don't do it because you're hoping someday I'll change my mind and give you another chance. Do it because you looked at yourself honestly and didn't like what you saw. Do it because you want to be able to live with yourself. Will you ever want to see me again? Maybe, I said honestly. Someday, when enough time has passed, when you've done the work of becoming someone different, when I can look at you without seeing all the ways you hurt me. But that day isn't today, and it won't be tomorrow. It might be months or years, or it might be never. I don't know yet. That's fair, he said quietly. More than fair, actually. There's something else you should know, I said. The lawsuit for the house equity. My lawyer says we'll win. You'll have to sell it and give me my portion. I'm not dropping that case. I know. I deserve that too. Use it as a chance to start over, to find a place that's truly yours, earned with your own money, your own effort. Not something given to you by a mother you took for granted. Sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what really matters. Like you did, David said. When I evicted you. Like I did. And look at me now. I'm still here. Stronger than I was. More myself than I've ever been. You can survive this, David. You can even grow from it, if you choose to. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation winding down naturally. When we finally said goodbye, it felt different than all our previous goodbyes. More honest, more real, less performative. After I hung up, I sat in my living room, my beautiful living room with its windows full of light, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From desperate poverty to wealth I'd never known existed. From devoted mother to woman who'd learned to choose herself. From someone who'd been called disgusting to someone who knew her own worth, regardless of others' opinions. The trust fund money would arrive in my account within the month. $2 million. On top of what I already had. More money than I could spend in the rest of my lifetime. I thought about what to do with it. Charity, perhaps. Scholarships for women my age who wanted to go back to school. Housing programs for elderly people facing eviction. Something that would turn my pain into purpose. My experience into help for others who were walking roads I'd already traveled. That evening, I went to the small park near my apartment and sat on a bench watching the sunset. An elderly woman sat down beside me, carrying a bag of bread to feed the pigeons that gathered expectantly at her feet. "Beautiful evening," she said, smiling at me. "Yes," I agreed. "It really is." "You look peaceful," she observed. "That's rare these days. Everyone always seems so worried, so rushed." "I earned this peace," I told her. "It cost me everything I thought mattered." Turned out what I thought mattered and what actually mattered were two very different things. She nodded sagely, tossing bread to the birds. That's wisdom. Most people never learn that lesson. They spend their whole lives chasing the wrong things. I almost did, I admitted. I almost let my life be defined by someone else's needs, someone else's value of me. Almost let myself disappear completely. But you didn't. No, I said, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I didn't. I'm still here, still Teresa, maybe more Teresa than I've ever been. The woman patted my hand with her wrinkled fingers. Good for you, dear. We old women need to remember that we matter, that our lives and happiness count just as much as anyone else's, maybe more because we've earned the right to our own joy. She finished feeding her birds and left, but her words stayed with me as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned from gold to pink to purple to dark. I'd earned the right to my own joy. After 64 years of putting others first, of making myself small, of giving until there was nothing left, I'd finally earned the right to choose myself. Not with bitterness or anger or revenge, just with the quiet certainty that I deserved better than what I'd accepted for so long. David would have his journey now, his own path through loss and hopefully toward growth. That was his story to write, his lessons to learn, his person to become. Mine was already written. Woman who survived. Woman who learned. Woman who discovered that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to matter. I walked home through the darkening streets, past windows glowing with other people's lives, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Gratitude. Not for the money, though that would make life easier. Not for the justice, though that had its own satisfaction. But gratitude for the chance to become myself. For the courage to walk away from people who couldn't see my value. For the strength to choose a life that honored who I actually was instead of who others needed me to be. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own apartment, in my own bed, in my own life. I'd make coffee in my own kitchen and sit by my own windows and plan my own day without considering anyone else's needs or wants or expectations. Tomorrow and every day after that, I would choose myself. And that was worth more than any trust fund could ever be. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or perfect reconciliations. Mine ended with something quieter but somehow more powerful. The simple act of a woman deciding she mattered and living like she meant it.